Gregory Shadwick is a creative director at the highly acclaimed and highly envied 72andSunny. They're located over in Los Angeles, if you didn't know. His career path may resonate with recent graduates, where he talks about the misdirection he had amid the 2008 recession. There are many parallels and lessons to what we are experiencing with the pandemic at the moment. I will hint that Gregory found himself flourishing in creativity during his unemployment by teaming up with like-minded friends. Their innate desire to create led Gregory to help art direct a music video that I still love today. Suit and Tie, featuring Jay-Z off Justin Timberlake's 2020 Experience studio album back in 2013. Yes, we'll talk about that. All our careers are a mystery. So Gregory tells us, rather than making an exact 5-year plan, follow what's interesting. Follow what will push you and excite you, and just say yes to things. So, to connect with Gregory and to see his hand-pick recommended resources just for you, head to our Instagram at enteringad. One more time, that's at enteringad. Also, this episode is supported by Chicago Portfolio School. Head over to chicagoportfolio.com to learn about them and how they've helped countless aspiring creatives break into the industry. Now, on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast, and as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. Gregory Shadwick, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. Thanks for coming on. How are you doing today?
My pleasure. Doing good, man. Thanks for inviting me on.
This is going to be a fun one. You are a creative director at 72andSunny.
72andSunny, that's right.
What a beautiful name, beautiful agency, great work. I know a lot of people, a lot of our audience is obsessed with you guys. So tell us about what you do and who you are. Who is Gregory Shadwick?
Yeah. Well, as you said, I'm a creative director over there. I've been there, I guess, coming up on maybe 5 years now, 4 or 5 years. I've done a ton of work at my time at 72, doing work for Google, Uber, and lately kind of the Marriott International, which is this massive kind of hotel conglomerates, and helping them kind of get through the pandemic. So I'm stoked that everybody's a big fan of the agency. I think it's a pretty remarkable place. I know it's been good to me, and every day I kind of go there. It still hasn't lost its magic. So I'm still as enamored with it as you guys are. Awesome. As someone who's lucky enough to work there.
Well, 5 years is a good amount of time in our agency world, so it means a lot, obviously. And tell us about, what are you working on now? Are we allowed to talk about it? Or
no, I can't talk about what I'm working on now, but yeah, I think a lot of the work that I've done throughout my career has kind of been at this kind of intersection of like technology, marketing, and kind of culture. So hence why I've since I've been at 72, done a lot of Google work, done a lot of Uber work. So that's kind of been my forte, and kind of this, as I've gone through my path in this industry, kind of wound up with those being things that I've kind of specialized in a little bit and focused on.
Gotcha. Now, do you get typecasted as later in your career when you specialize? Is that kind of just how it goes? And is it what you prefer?
Some people, in some things, I know that you can. I know that there are a lot of people who do like automotive advertising, and that becomes their calling card, and they get really, really good at it, and they know all the nuances of it. Mm-hmm. With the tech, especially like the tech and the hardware world, particularly the hardware world, when you're talking about phones or laptops or iPads or things like that, there's some very specific, details and nuances that you need to know when making work. But I think as you just kind of get those things under your belt and you understand them and learn how to work with them, it becomes something that you know and you understand that world, and it becomes easier to navigate and get your ideas out, sharper, quicker, better. So I wouldn't say that it's typecasting, but I think as you kind of work on different clients in different industries and different sectors, you kind of like pick up on these little things, and the more you do it, the better you get at those. So it makes it easier to kind of like jump from one type of client in that world to the next.
Well, tech's a good one to be good at for sure.
Yeah.
It's always growing. What's one like niche that you wish looking back you would have specialized in more so, or you're
Oh
kind of like
man.
you kind of go, man, I kind of wish I was working on that
Yeah.
that industry.
It's wild. It is such a wild time to be doing this job in the world right now, because I think what's so interesting about this question is that things are changing so fast, and things are moving so fast that I think some of the answers that I would give you might be industries that like might not even be around anymore in their current incarnation. And also some of the things that are so exciting are entirely new industries that have popped up. I think some things that like I find personally interesting right now is, particularly here in California, other parts of the world, the cannabis industry it's like right on the precipice of becoming this massive, industry that's going to, as if the trend continues, become something that more and more is going to be readily available in every state, and then in other parts of the globe. I think that's a really kind of fascinating thing that's going to be popping up, that if I were a young person looking at like, oh, what are some industries that are going to be doing something, that's something that is just in such a just like genesis stage right now.
Interesting.
I think another thing is, in the food world, you're seeing lots of really interesting things, particularly with like the advent of these new kind of like, lab, quote unquote, lab grown meats.
Oh
Whether
yeah.
it's like, yeah, I think Beyond's like one example of that. There's a better burgers, things like that.
Mhm.
There's a really fascinating thing that's starting to happen there with that industry that is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen. And it's starting to kind of creep its way in there to all these places. But if you were young and you could kind of edge your way into that and see things happening, it's going to be changing that all these nuances that I'm talking about, that like people who've worked in automotive or people who've worked in tech, all those nuances are waiting to be discovered.
Right.
And for a young person to like get into stuff with that and kind of understand the ins and outs of it, just makes you something. It just gives you that like just kind of unique edge of this person has experience in this thing that is a wildly booming market. So
Interesting. So now I'm a college student. Let's
yeah,
let's put ourselves in the perspective of a college student. If I was a college student right now, I would look at those big brands, maybe, create spec work that's interesting for those brands. We're talking about creative here. We're talking about copywriting or art direction, and also probably researching those nuances. What are the laws in my state? What is the future looking like? What's the data say? Because if you
yeah.
can speak knowledgeably on that and you have that creative direction under your belt, you're gonna ace those interviews.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really fascinating too, because I think for young people, this is like the greatest time to be young creative. It's also the worst time to be young creative. It's
Sure.
the greatest in that like
Mm.
you have all these amazing tools that are your world. They're things that you've created. They're, whether it's technology, whether it's social media, it's things that this younger kind of people coming out of college innately know and understand and how to use in as much as possible. And if you pair that knowledge with a brand or a company or whatever that's just kind of like starting to find its way and it's in its infancy, you essentially can write some of those rules. You can essentially make up the roadmap for how to successfully, kind of bring these brands into popular consciousness. And I think that's a really interesting place to be in. Now, what sucks is that you're also kind of interested in entering the industry at a time where it's harder than ever to find like just really good training and really good kind of people who can kind of show you some of the old rules and kind of teach you the craft of that in a way that can be applied to the where we're headed now.
Interesting.
I was super lucky kind of coming up. There were a lot of people who took the time to kind of show me things. I was very fortunate to have a lot of great people that I worked under who took that time to kind of show me things and explain things in a way and really kind of allowed me to develop my craft and in a way where I was able to fail. I was able to kind of, screw things up. But really at the same time, like drill home these fundamentals that, I've carried with me throughout this career. So yeah, I think that's like both the like blessing and curse of people who are, coming out of school right now. It's so amazing, but it's also so difficult at the same time. There's this incredible change and incredible new things that are happening, but that also creates this lack of certainty, and it can be a little bit kind of an abyss of trying to get your way in. So, so I think like, it's something that like, I think people coming out, of portfolio school and whatnot, or wherever it is or whatever they're doing, try and see the world in that way, because there's some really interesting opportunities that you guys will have.
Yeah, love that. So you said you had a lot of good mentors when you were just starting out. So let's kick it back to how you started, because you were at Mizzou. What did you study at Mizzou? You were journalism?
Yeah, so I started out in journalism, and I got into that purely because I was a good writer, and I'd always kind of been making things my whole life. So for me, just kind of saying, all right, well, I know how to do things. I know how to build things. I know how to make things. And I'm a solid writer. Let me just try my hand at that. And it was going great up until, about halfway through my time in college. And I started to see that the industry of journalism just absolutely collapsing. Sure. And they're just the digital revolution was kind of coming in. Papers were kind of just losing all this revenue. They were folding, reducing numbers and staff. There weren't a lot of opportunities out there, and some of the opportunities that were out there for journalists, like I had some friends who were photojournalists, and like, to go out and make a name for themselves, they literally had to like go over to Iraq or something like that, and kind of really take these, high risk gigs. So all that kind of came together, and I thought, well, man, I better hedge my bets, because I don't know if there's going to be an industry coming out of school of journalism, right? I don't know what it's going to look like. And, but I know that I love writing. I know that I've got this like ability to just make things. So I kind of veered and took a couple ad courses, and got out of school, and was very, very fortunate enough that there was a company called Core, which was at the time kind of this, I guess I would call it like a design, production, art studio that was doing a lot of like venture capital funded projects. Were just very fascinating, that really rode that line between marketing and technology and culture. And they started out as a kind of semi-typical agency design studio, but then they kind of shifted their way into being this kind of like new model of what a marketing and culture agency could be. And they brought me on, and I was just kind of like, didn't have any idea what I was doing, but I think they thought I could kind of write. And they were like, we could kind of use this guy to write some treatments, and he seems kind of interesting. He's a little bit weird, but like, let's just see what happens, and maybe we'll fire him in a week. But I got in there, and I was there, and it was one of the most amazing, just one of the just purest growth times in my life. And got to work on all these really fascinating, interesting projects, again, that kind of rode the line of what is culture, what is marketing, what is technology, where all these things kind of come together. And it was great and amazing. And then 2008 came.
Oh,
And
yep.
like so many of my colleagues just took the legs out of everything.
Right.
And the place had a lot of like venture capital investments behind it that just immediately the spigot shut off, and it just couldn't hold itself up. It was too small, and wasn't part of like a big network or anything, and so it shut down. And that led me into this kind of what I just call like my like roaming the earth years of
Okay.
creativity, which were wildly fruitful on a personal creative level, and wildly unfruitful on a personal economic level.
Okay. Okay.
Um, because I took, I'd been working at this, amazing studio for a while, making all these great things, making all these great friends who were just these wildly creative people, just in their own right. So I had this kind of network of people who all of us finally, suddenly found ourselves without any work or anything to do.
Okay.
And but we had a lot of time on our hands, and we had each other. And, for us, it was this kind of this moment of like, well, we can either just kind of like sit around all day trying to do job interviews, or we can just try and make things that we've always wanted to make.
Wow.
And that period led to a lot of just experimenting, trying to make apps, trying to, do art, and trying to do just, film and video productions. And me and a couple of my colleagues got really into making music videos. And, we would go and we'd make these things, and we would do them for anybody. It would be small artists, big artists, people who had money, people who had no budget. But we were really just trying to just be as creative as possible with whatever we had on hand. And I love that. I still to this day, I love music videos with a passion, because it is almost this like it's the exact same tools and it's the exact same muscles that you use when making a campaign.
Okay.
You've got
Interesting.
you've got a certain amount of time, whatever that length of that song is. You've got to figure out like some kind of message that you want to get across in this time period, and you have to do so in the most visceral, impactful way possible. And that was a really great training ground for everything that I would do in marketing and advertising afterwards, because I really kind of in my work, and sometimes you can see it, I always try and find this kind of connection between like visceral, guttural, and intellectual things kind of coming together. And that for me is what I get really excited by, when you've got something that just like is so graphically interesting, and then at the same time there's a message that's just so fascinating, or a story that's being told that's fascinating, and all that kind of comes together in just a really powerful way. I still get stoked about that. And it's something that just like is one of the most joyful things in the world to me.
Interesting. I've never heard the connection between making music videos and how that compares to making campaigns. So that's really, I like that a lot.
So many great directors, and especially directors who, will shoot ads. So many of them got their start in music videos, because usually there's like a $5,000 budget. There's not a lot of money, maybe $50,000 if it's like a pretty good artist. Sometimes if it's a really big artist, there's more. But it's kind of low stakes. It's generally kind of like a collaboration between, if there's a label, the label, and the artist. But really, these artists, like, they'll either have a vision of what they want to try and do, or they're just like, give me the raddest thing possible for my song, and I'll tell you if it's cool or not. And so it is that same kind of dynamic of like, there's still a client. It's either an artist or a label. You're still pitching them the idea to get them to fund the making of it, and so on and so forth. So there's so many parallels there. And you see a lot of directors who come from that, because I think with music videos, there's condensed storytelling that has to happen.
Of course.
And if there's any truth about the reality that we're living in, is that you have a matter of seconds to hook somebody, if even that, and keep their attention locked. And I think a lot of great directors who are also great directors for advertising and also creatives, kind of have been in the orbit of those worlds, because it is about just finding that super potent, super undistilled, just imagery that can kind of hit you or speak to you as quickly as possible.
So you were doing this, you were doing this with your friends in 2008, and you didn't really have a full-time career at this time. You're just
I
doing what
was
you.
I was just kind of trying to scrounge whatever money I could. I would do
Sure.
freelancing. I did a couple of short stints at, just with just anybody who would kind of pay me at that point.
So did any of that
Um,
catch fire then? Did any?
well, it did. A lot of the work that I was doing with these music videos, it I had kind of gotten to know Justin Timberlake's creative directors, and I had done some work with them in the past. And they'd seen kind of some of the stuff that I was doing. We both just happened to be kind of in LA at the time. They called me up and they're like, "Hey, Justin's about to do a couple big things. Why don't you come in and talk with us about stuff?" And I was like, "Okay, that's cool. What's going
Wow.
on with this?" So the first thing that came out of that was he was about to release a 2020 experience, and he had some ideas of how to bring that together, and they just needed help. They need someone to kind of help write treatments, develop ideas, develop music video ideas for the launch of that. So I came out and helped them with that a little bit, and we did some work on the Suit and Tie music video, which
Nice.
came out of that, which I got to help creative direct, and that was pretty amazing. David Fincher shot that, so it was kind of like this dream of having this amazing director kind of come in. He did it as a favor to Justin because he had just done The Social Network for him, and it was just this really
Wow.
really awesome experience to kind of help develop all that. And at the same time, Justin had just kind of like bought a stake in what was MySpace at the time.
Sure.
And he wanted his creative teams, these two guys that I was working for at the time, to like make sure that his kind of imprint was there on the kind of relaunch of that network, of that social network as well.
What year was this?
This was, gosh, 20, man, it must have been around like 2010 or 2011-ish,
Okay.
2012.
Sure.
That time in my life was such a blur because there was so many things happening.
Yeah.
And, it wasn't like I was kind of regularly working regular jobs. It was just kind of all these things that would come along.
Sure.
And so we went in there and, just started making content and marketing and just shooting a lot of stuff to just kind of, take this network, which was kind of like treading water at the time, if not, almost forgotten, and just do this crazy idea of trying to like unsink the Titanic.
Sure.
And it was wild. It was so much fun. And there's so many crazy things that were happening. And it ultimately did not work at all, which I think is evidenced by the lack of MySpace being around. But what that did was I was doing so much work there with music, and the content and the promotions that we were doing were great. And I was still kind of making music videos on my own as well. And some of that work caught the eye of a recruiter at Media Arts Lab.
Wow.
Which is Apple's dedicated agency. Steve Jobs started it when he went down to Lee Clow back in the day and was like, "I'm going to be doing some revolutionary stuff. I want an agency that's only there for me. I want you to break off a chunk of TBWA and make it its own thing, its own building. Like I want Steve Jobs wants his agency, so give it to you." So they made it for him.
Mm-hmm.
And that became Media Arts Lab. And at the time when they had contacted me, there was a recruiter there, had seen a bunch of my music video work, and brought me in because they were starting at that point to kind of work on what was to become of music with Apple, and figuring out at that time iTunes was like pretty old and was not kind of working as well as it should. Streaming was starting to take over. Spotify was starting to make an imprint in there. And they had been working in the background on just having this huge shift to what now has become Apple Music.
Yep.
And so all of this stuff that I'd been doing perfectly set me up to kind of come in and help with that, because I'd spent my, the good part of, 6-7 years doing just that. And as I told you before, like the notion of concepting a music video and pitching a music video is so similar to pitching any type of campaign, that it was just kind of a really smooth transition going into that world. I got there and started to work on that, and it was great. And then other projects kind of came along, and what was so amazing about that is I was able to take what I had learned and do, but then at the same time, I got there and I was learning so much about technology and the marketing of tech, specifically hardware and software, and just learned a crazy amount of things about how to do that from at what I think is one of the greatest agencies in the world, and for one of the greatest marketers in the world, still to this day. So it was a pretty amazing time, and I was super privileged and super lucky to kind of take this circuitous path of just trying stuff, just like trying to be creative, trying to kind of explore things that I was into, to make things, because that made me happy. But then it just kind of wound its way into these gigs that led me to where I am. So it was a not a traditional path that most people go through. I didn't, I didn't go to portfolio school. I would have loved to. I think portfolio school is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of just didn't work out that way. And I didn't kind of like jump into the big agency world right away. I kind of came later than most people did. And, but I think all that stuff kind of, I just always had this mentality of just saying yes to whatever kind of interesting thing came along. I didn't worry so much about, was there going to be money with it? Was I going to be able to like make things happen? Because fortunately I was like very young and able to, didn't have much that I needed to worry about. So, so just saying yes to all these things kind of just led me in this way where, I got to where I am now. So
this is incredible. And I can't help but, because I wrote down, I keep thinking back to, it was 2008, which forced you to, meet up with your friends and come up with these creative ideas and kind of just sit around and think all day. And that really kind of connects with like the COVID and 2020. And when I graduated in 2021, still today, like the job market's still tough. I know. So
it's crazy.
Today, I mean, it's pretty similar.
It is strikingly similar. I will say, it is much harder now. I think COVID exacerbates so many things, and I really feel for it for young people kind of coming out right now, because at least back then we were able to get together and we were able to kind of do things in a way and not have to worry. And I think COVID made it so hard because you just couldn't collaborate, in that way that we were able to before. Now, what's amazing is all these other technologies came out, like being able to, have conversations like we're having now. And it opened up so many other things to being able to just kind of work with anyone in the world at any time. So I think there was some great stuff that came out with that. But I think there was such a learning curve that by the time everybody figured it out, it was like a couple months into it. So I think the parallels, you're absolutely right. I think there are tons of parallels. I think it's definitely harder now. But all that is to say is that even with that kind of, trying to figure stuff out, I think we always just, have this kind of like, you can bleep this out, but just kind of this like, fuck it attitude of like, F it. Let's just try and do something, because what else is there to do? What else, what do we have to lose? We're already in like the worst situation, imaginable. There has, in 2008, it was like it was the worst recession since like the Great Depression, and so we're like, no matter what we do, it's not going to get any worse than this for the most part. So I think, if there's one thing that I can, say, especially to, like, people getting out, is like, give yourself some credit, especially right now. It can be really, really hard, especially when things, like, this industry is such a roller coaster. It's like highs and lows. It's feast or famines. You're up, you're down. There's twists and turns and all sorts of unexpected stuff. But you give yourself some credit, because some of these things just take time. They take kind of perseverance, and they take just trying things out and experimenting and seeing different things. And it's not gonna, like, things aren't gonna happen all at once, especially now. Now there may be, like, in a couple of years or two or a couple of months or whatever, like, sometimes things just happen and boom, here we are on this rocket ship and everything's happening all at once. And there's people are hiring left and right, and all these great things start to happen. But you got to give yourself some credit. I think it's especially hard for young people now, because you have all these amazing things, all these amazing technologies and social media that you have access to. But also, there's this kind of permeating on social media is this, like, hustle culture, this, like, grind culture, which is, I call it, like, the hustle porn mindset out there. That's just like, if you don't own 3 houses by the time you're 30, if you haven't, become a billionaire off crypto, if you haven't done this or that, like, what are you doing? And I think if that would have been around in 2008, I think I would have just been crushed by it, and mentally would have just been in a swirl, because it's there, and it's kind of making you feel inadequate. But it's also something that it's just not the way the world generally works. That some of those people may have been lucky like that. Maybe they do have 30 houses by 30. I don't know. Maybe their Dogecoin exploded. I don't know. I didn't buy it. Sure. What I will say is that, like, don't, like, you gotta, like, tune that stuff out, and you just gotta, like, you gotta follow whatever path you need to do to kind of get there, and you got to give yourself time. If you don't do that, it's just too much. I always, like, tell people that it kind of takes 10 years to get really good at this job. Wow. And I say that because there are, when you first start out, like, you suck. You're just, I mean, there might be some prodigies out there. Let me not generalize, but, like, I wasn't great. I wasn't amazing. I had, like, a few paltry skills that I could use. And you're going to mess up when you're starting out. You're going to get fired from jobs. You're going to be laid off for no reason of anything that you did, because a once in a lifetime pandemic shows up,
True.
And, there'll be times when you'll feel like you're stranded in a gig, or like you're totally washed up. I mean, everybody has these feelings. And I think you just need to understand that it takes time to kind of get past this. I think, like, imposter syndrome is a lot of things that people talk about sometimes. That
Sure.
Everyone feels that at every point in their career. So if you're feeling it young, don't worry. It's okay. Just know that, give it time and keep trying, and you eventually kind of get over things. You learn all these nuances. You learn all these little details about how to present an idea, how to succinctly write an idea, how to put it together visually, how to present it to your CDs, how to present it to clients in a way that, once you learn those things and practice those and do those a bajillion times, roughly, in my case, 10 years-ish.
Sure.
Then you get really good at it. And then you have this, like, feeling of like, okay, we could do anything with this, or I can do anything. And you start to, like, find your footing. And that said, there are days when I still feel like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't deserve it. I am totally not the right person for this. But then I look back on all those things that I've done and learned and tried, and you quickly get over that so much faster. So I just say, really give your guys self some credit, give yourself some time, give yourself some breathing room. Because while the world is moving super fast, like, sometimes it just takes some patience, and I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, it takes time, and we like hearing that from your perspective. It does take time, even 10 years. Like, so don't stress the day-to-day so much. Just trust the process.
Just trust it. Just trust it. I also, one thing that I think is if there's anything I learned from my kind of wandering years, and I think that as this before, is just like say yes to as much as you can starting out. Um, you know, you if there's something that seems remotely interesting, you just try it out and just see. You know, you know, if that might be like a job, that might be like something that like, you know, working on a side project with a friend or whatever, or you know, you meet somebody and they've got some interesting idea, and you're like, oh, maybe like try and say yes to whatever you can. You know, and you know, starting out, you don't have a ton of money, you might have a bunch of debt. Like, don't do anything that's going to like hurt you financially,
Sure.
but if you can find time or energy, which you have a lot of when you're young, and
Yeah.
you know, try and say yes to so many things, and you'll be amazed at what that will lead to. I think that was kind of like one of the things that I learned when I, you know, was kind of in these years of just trying to do things and see people and meet things. And you know, I think it's you know, like I never really had this 5-year plan that some people have. You know, like what do you want for your future? I was like, I don't know. I just want to do things that excite me and feel good, and
Mhm.
that lead me, you know, and who knows what happens after that. But if I can do that and constantly be putting myself in situations where I'm around people like that, then
Mm.
you know, who knows?
That's refreshing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a super important thing. Another thing that I think is that goes along with that is when you're starting out, just try and make as much as you can.
Yes.
I'm sure your teachers are telling you this, and you know, you're super fortunate that you have these projects that they're giving you. And
Mhm.
but I have a thing for myself where like every day I just try and do like one thing that I'm proud of. Like the reality of this job is some days you're working it, you're grinding. At the end of the day, you're like, holy crap, what did I just do? I don't even like, what did I have to show for today?
Yeah.
But I think one thing that you can do is always try and do one thing a day that you've made something that you're just kind of stoked about. Sometimes for me, that's just like an email that I wrote. And I'm just like,
Sure.
man, that email, chef's kiss. Just
Love it.
great. I'm so stoked at what that was. The rest of the day was a total disaster, but like I got this one thing,
Good email.
and yeah, it was a good damn email.
Nice.
And I flexed my creative muscle on it, and that's great. You know, like it's a thing. This is not a term that's my own. I don't know who says something. It's like a thing called like no 0 days.
What does
And
that mean?
a 0 day is like a day when you feel like at the end of the day where you like have contributed absolutely nothing.
Mm.
We're just like, oh my God, I just like, you know, it might be a day where you're just kind of, and I had a bunch of these, you know, when I was kind of unemployed, and you know, you have these days you're just like, what am I doing? Like, what is happening? And then you look at the clock and suddenly it's like 7 o'clock at night already. And
Sure.
you're like still in your pajamas, you know, like eating Fruit Loops out of you know, the bag, you know? So, um, but it's this idea that like always try and do something where you're just contributing something to the universe,
Mhm.
no matter how small it is, because that builds that habit. You know, you might have a day where you do absolutely nothing, but maybe there's like one thing that you did, that you made or you created, that it didn't matter. You know,
Mhm.
the rest of that day totally was fine. It may have led you to that idea or that insight or the thing. And it can be super small. It can be like writing a single sentence. It can be writing like a rough idea for something that you're interested in. But try and always do that, because getting in that habit, I think, is something I think is really important. It's about this idea of kind of finding flow, and like
Mm.
mental and creative flow. And I don't know if you guys talk about that, but it's this idea of like very quickly learning to like flex this muscle of getting in this state of just making and being like
Yeah.
hyper focused on things, which in this day and age I think is super important because there's so many distractions and so many incredible things. I mean, like me personally,
Mhm.
I could sit and watch streaming shows all day long, endlessly, and just be totally stoked by that. I
Mhm.
could, I don't know, I'm just as like hooked on TikTok as anybody else. You know, like there's all these things that are like grappling for your attention. and I'm inherently just like pulled into those things. I've like, I wouldn't say it's ADD, but like my attention span is like that of a gnat. So I really had to kind of like work hard to like exercise that idea of just like flow, just like getting into a state where you mentally can kind of just let yourself go.
I love that. And I
Yeah.
love getting that state. And I was actually trying to do that a couple nights ago with my roommates who are in business and finance. And I got them into this flow, like you're talking about. We had the whiteboard
Yeah.
out and we are trying to write a stand-up comedy routine, a 5-minute set.
Yes.
And it was just so fun to like get them in on it. And we did that for like 30, 40 minutes. And then after I was like, I felt great, like refreshed, and like you can feel it like physically. Like
you can feel it. It is, there's something about, and I think that's why people who have this job, no matter how hard it gets and crazy it is and insane it is, I think that an act of like creating stuff, there's something so cathartic about it. And it is such a release. And like you said, you get in that zone, and in a very like short amount of time, you kind of like look up and you come out of it and you're like, whoa, look at all this stuff I did. Now, again, it may be absolute crap,
sure,
but you've got something there to work with to start. Another really good trick is like the 10-minute trick.
What's that?
And it's this is a great practice when you're like starting out, you're trying to really work that like flow finding muscle. Is you just set a timer and you're like, I'm just gonna sit down and I'm gonna do one thing for 10 minutes. I don't care what happens. I don't care like what the result of it is, but like I want to try and do something. And it may be just like writing. This is a great thing to do after like you get briefed, by the way.
Interesting.
You get briefed on a project, you got all these thoughts. Just set a timer for 10 minutes and just bang your fingers on the keyboard or pull up Photoshop and just kind of like just get all the ideas, just like vomit them out for 10 minutes. And don't do anything else during that time period. And there's something about the psychological act of forcing yourself to do something for that time period that suddenly like your alarm goes off and you're like, oh wait, let me just keep going for like another few more minutes.
Yeah.
And suddenly there you are, like you were saying the other night, 45 minutes later, and you just kind of like got all these rough thoughts out.
Yeah.
And if you can kind of segment your working in that way, or if you're feeling stuck, or if you don't know where to go, you can do that with anything. It can be like brainstorming with your partner. Just like hit that button and you're not going to do anything. You're not going to look at your phones. You're not going to look at your laptops. You're just going to sit there and just like riff.
Love it.
And it's a really great technique to getting into that flow state and getting into that, free of distractions, and just giving yourself that ability, because it's achievable. Like anybody can, even in this day and age, anyone can stay relatively focused for a 10-minute period.
Exactly.
And that's why I say it kind of goes back to like, try and find ways to make it easy on yourself. Like, you can work really hard and get to things, or you can try and find ways to like be super lazy and easy and make it easier for yourself to kind of get to these things. Cause I think, it's hard to kind of just like pluck things out of the air. Sometimes it works that way. Sometimes ideas just kind of reveal themselves to you, but more often than not, they only reveal themselves after you've really thought about something for a long time and you've like kind of put the work in, and suddenly like whatever the alchemy of creativity happens, you just like pluck something out of the air and you're like, oh my God, there it is. That's the idea I was looking for.
You have to put that work in the beginning.
You got to do that work. Yes. Yeah. Without a doubt. So I think that's a really good thing. And I could talk about that all day. I mean, there's all sorts of techniques from just like, that you can get into that. But, and then this is that just to, kind of to bank off what you were just talking about. And you're doing this, like when you talk about just being with your friends or just kind of like riffing on comedy ideas, but like surround yourself as much as you can, surround yourself with people who want to make things.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily, when you're young and you're in school and you're starting out, it's great that you're going to portfolio school because you've got this, this group of beings that all want to make things, so that's amazing. You've already got like a leg up on it. It doesn't have to be, and if you're not in portfolio school, or if you find yourself once you graduate portfolio school, just it doesn't necessarily have to be ad people. It can be music people. It can be people interested in doing TV stuff, comedy, books, starting a business. It could be any of these things, but surround yourself with people who are interested in making things. It doesn't have to be like they have this grand idea, but when you're around people who are inherently makers, I believe they're kind of fundamentally different people. I think anybody can be a maker or creative, but there's a mindset that you have to be in to get to that space where you see the world as a place where you need to make things, not just necessarily like sit back and just consume things.
Sure.
And I think you find that when you're around, and not to say like one is a better way to live or not, but when you're around people who kind of have that like the world is a place to be consumed mindset, things just kind of like happen. They don't make things happen necessarily. And that may be like an overly broad generalization, but I think when you're around people who are constantly wanting to make things, you kind of get like hooked into that. And you've got this like whole world of people that you can kind of go to and be like, hey, I want to try and make something, or I've got this idea, or I've got this thing, or hey, can you help me out with this? And you've got this kind of network, this team of people, much like you have it at Portfolio School, that you can kind of bank on to do things with.
Yeah.
And it just becomes a lot easier to get, again, it's like, if it's all about kind of getting your ideas out there and finding a way to manifest them, having a group of people who are in that same mindset just makes it easier on yourself to do that.
I love it. Yeah, you just got to find those people wherever they're at. They can be your close friends. They can be, classmates, whoever they are.
Whoever they are. And I think it's amazing too, because then that becomes like your network of people, and you do things and you experiment with things together. It's low stakes most of the time. So if it like epically fails, no sweat. You move on to the
high ceiling on it. It can go really well.
Yeah, exactly. So, so it's just kind of a good thing to do and try and seek out. And you guys are super lucky. Chicago Portfolio School is great, and I think you guys are lucky to have that there and take advantage. So I'd say just like try and take advantage of the fact that like you're already in this space of all these makers and doers and people who want to kind of go out and make things happen. So try and just kind of like maximize that as much as possible.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. I think this has been fantastic advice, and you're super wise, and we appreciate your perspective. Can we reach out to you? Can students that are listening, wherever you may be at, you're in LA, what's your preferred method of reach out? LinkedIn, Instagram? Do you have a website? What do you prefer?
Yeah. I mean, you can any of those methods are possible. I think LinkedIn's always so easy to get to people. If I don't hit you up back right away, apologies, but I will eventually, I promise. If you can check out my website and send me emails. So any of those are great. If you Instagram, whatever, however you can find me, I promise I will eventually respond.
Amazing. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I got for you. This has been fantastic. We'll have people reach out to you, and we'll keep your resources. I don't know if you sent them to me yet, but I'll ask you for them. We'll post those on Instagram on our account at Entering Ad. But it's been great, Gregory.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Gina. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
All right. Have a great day.
Right on.
Did you hear anything on this episode about a job you'd like to have someday, soon, in advertising, strategy, design? The kind of job where you use your brain and your creativity? If you did, chances are a portfolio can really help you get that job. That's where Chicago Portfolio School comes in. They have programs and classes that help you show off your thinking and get you the job you want. So visit them at chicagoportfolio.com. And if you drop my name, Gino, into the chat box, they'll send you more info and a cool Sharpie. Or just some more info. You can decide that. Thanks. Thank you all for listening to this entire episode of the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this week's guest. Make sure you go and connect with them on LinkedIn. Tell them that Breaking and Entering sent you. Now, thank you to Mikey Malarkey, our audio technician, and Buchun Zhang, our creative director, as well as the student team from the Midnight Oil Agency at the University of Illinois. Can't do it without you all. Thank you very much. We will see you all next week with another amazing guest.